So we're super excited once again to have this session. For those of you that don't know, I'm Lucretia Hall. I'm the Planning Director for Prince George's County. We've been doing this series as part of a way to expose more of what we do here at Prince George's County Planning Department. It's been an exciting Brown Bag series. We've had some great speakers from our department, so super excited about the speakers that will be speaking today. So we're going to have a very important topic. Recently, our county council has acted on some changes on this topic here locally. I don't want to steal any of my team's thunder, but we did get an award this year on the ordinance, and so some of the great team members are here as well to talk about that. I do not want to take any more of your time, but I'm super excited that you guys are engaged. Please feel free to put comments in the chat. We have people monitoring the activity online, and we're going to have a Q&A afterwards, and so thank you again for coming out today. So I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to do a quick recap on what we discussed on our last session. Our last session was the zoning and subdivision. Our supervisors from the zoning section and urban design, subdivision section showed us the components of zoning, which included the zoning ordinance, and the zoning map. They walked us through the map amendment review and approval process, as well as the next steps in this development process that included subdivision, public facility standards that are normally reviewed at the time of subdivision, any type of applications that the subdivision section normally reviews, which include preliminary plan of subdivision, final plats, adequacy, vacation petitions, and most importantly, they showed us how to engage and participate in the development process. So we normally send the slides after each session. If you did not receive it, please put it in the chat, so we will send them to you. Today's session, as the director mentioned, will focus on the Woodland Conservation Ordinance. And I would like to give a little quick heads up that we will continue the sessions in 2025. Our first session in January 14 will be focused on transportation procedures, and it will include bicycle and pedestrian impact statements. So stay on the lookout. You will receive, if you are part of our mailing list, you will receive an email inviting you to register to the next session. So with further ado, I will introduce Tom first, our supervisor from Environmental Planning Section.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you all, and good afternoon. I think it's yes, we are just into the afternoon. My name is Tom Burke. I'm the supervisor of the Environmental Planning Section. And as Natalia indicated, we this last July we implemented the new Woodland Conservation Ordinance. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a history behind that, and then where we are today. Okay, so in May of 2023, the state of Maryland approved legislation with a laundry list of requirements that all jurisdictions had to meet or develop their own alternative program, subject to approval by the Department of Natural Resources, who oversee the Forest Conservation Act. So the kicker to this was that this all had to be done by and implemented by July 1, 2024. So it didn't give us a lot of time. Sounds like 13 months, sounds like a lot, but we also had our regular work program that was continuing through this time. So the intent of the legislation was to beef up conservation efforts, expand stream buffers, and increase tree canopy throughout the state. So we established a committee within the environmental planning section and set to work first trying to interpret some of the new mandate from DNR. And then it was right to work establishing our own alternative program. There wasn't a lot of time to do this, and anyone here who has processed legislation knows that it's not necessarily a linear path. So in fact, at the 11th hour, we had completed our draft. We had several public and industry information sessions and meetings. We transmitted legislation to the county council and had received feedback. And after all that, the state passed subsequent legislation delaying part of the process for another 2 years, so to be implemented by July 1, 2026. Well, as far as all the work we had done and the progress we had made on parts of the legislation, the train had already left the station. We were set to continue this for the original implementation date of July 1. Okay. So as a little background, as we all know, the DC metro area and the country for that matter was experiencing considerable growth and suburban sprawl that accelerated in the 1950s. This kind of illustrates there, Prince George's County is roughly, hopefully still circled on that. Yeah, so roughly circled. The red indicating explosions of population in those parts of this area here. So that price came mostly at the cost of woodland and farmland, although tobacco farming in Maryland and particularly in Prince George's County was still very strong for another 40 years past that. So then the result was ultimately a loss of woodland and along with that wildlife habitat and stream health. As at the time, and we've seen this in older communities, there was little or no stormwater management. Most of it was consisted of concentrated into, we had the storm drains on the curbs and concentrated that into concrete pipes that were directly discharged into the streams without any infiltration at all. In fact, there are even a lot of streams in this county that we are hopefully in a process of undoing to some degree, that the streams themselves were encased in concrete and channelized. So during this time of growth, there was this considerable loss of woodland wildlife habitat, and this showed a very concerning trend. So Prince George's County enacted our first woodland conservation ordinance in 1990. We were the first county in the state of Maryland to do so. And then a year later, the state of Maryland passed its Forest Conservation Act, making woodland conservation a statewide requirement. And they modeled this program after Prince George's County's ordinance. So we had some pretty serious forward thinkers back then to come up with this ahead of the state, and then the state for the state to actually model their program after us. So then in 2010, we revised the ordinance, refining some of the provisions from the prior and adding a tree canopy coverage ordinance. And it's important to note that during this time, of course, the DC region continued to grow, and particularly Prince George's County offered a more affordable alternative to the increasing rent prices that were skyrocketing in DC. So we remained very busy with the implementation of this 2010 program, and a full-on rewrite was not a priority to us. So we continued with this 2010 ordinance until the state came with these new bills and set the wheels in motion. So around this time, we were unfortunately subjected to some pretty negative press in the area based on a report put out by the Harry R. Hughes Center. And this showed that between 2013 and 2018, of all the counties in Maryland, Prince George's County had the most forest loss of any. So for reference, if you can't already identify which one is Prince George's County, I put a nice red arrow there, so you can see, and it is considerable. You look at this chart, and it looks like we have really done a lot worse with our program than any other jurisdiction. Now, keep in mind there are other factors at play here. One is the development pressure that we were receiving, and some of these other counties were maybe older and were already more established or weren't experiencing the growth that we were. But there are a few on there that do identify with the DC region, Montgomery County and Arundel County, that were also experiencing considerable loss, just not to the extent that we were. So interestingly, at this time, we had just had our own study conducted by an independent group at the University of Vermont that told a very different story. The discrepancy between, this study showed that between 2009 and 2020, Prince George's County actually showed a net gain, albeit modest, only a 1% gain over the same period, or the relative same period. So the discrepancy between the two came down to a level of detail picked up from the two studies. The study we contracted through the University of Vermont provided a more detailed survey which picked up smaller caliber trees than the Hughes study, indicating that while we did have significant clearing and growth during this period, that reforestation and replanting efforts were associated with all this new development were ongoing and successful, because this study that we contracted was able to pick up these smaller caliber trees. They were probably newer, younger trees that were the result of the development requirements. And the Hughes study did not pick up that level of detail. So the problem here is that the data collection methods from the Hughes study were more widely accepted, and the results of that study were what was catching the attention of various environmental groups, the county, and of course the press. So with the state legislation and all that bad press in hand, we set to task on the revisions to our ordinance with these 8 priorities, or 8 primary focuses, I should say. Of these, I would say our top 4 focuses were the stream buffers, tree canopy, the forest threshold and replacement requirements, and the grandfathering. In this presentation, I'm going to go into a little detail on those four topics. So stream buffers within the county. So they're technically not part of the Woodland Conservation Ordinance. Stream buffers are provided, they're actually in the subdivision regulations, but are typically intrinsically entwined in conservation and protection of woodland and wildlife corridors. In fact, the new state mandate requires that stream buffers be the first priority in preservation. So previously, is this, are you able to read that? I think it might be a little small, but these slides I think we can distribute after the presentation, and we can distribute this out to you all. So previously, stream buffers were determined based on where they occurred. All right, so inside the Beltway, outside the Beltway, in the outer suburbs, and in the rural parts of the county, with some exceptions to that. And these stream buffers were 60 feet, 75 feet, and 100 feet, respectively. And so those are identified. The gray area, if I can step away from here for a sec, the gray area is inside the Beltway roughly. The light blue area is outside the 75-foot buffer, and then the greener area is the 100-foot buffer. So this determination was made regardless of the stream classification as either a perennial or intermittent stream. So these were absolute buffers, depending on what part of the county. So with the new mandate, DNR legislated that stream buffers be 50 feet for intermittent streams and 100 feet for perennial streams. So while designing our alternative program, we simplified it by requiring 100-foot buffers outside of our transit centers and 75 feet inside the transit centers, regardless of whether the stream is intermittent or perennial. We're still working with DNR on their acceptance of that alternative, because even though the majority of the county will have a much greater buffer requirement than the state mandates, by allowing a reduction to 75 feet inside a transit center of what could potentially be a perennial stream, and have what the state requires as a 100-foot buffer, that might be construed as less restrictive than the state law, which we all know in legislation is a big no-no. So like I said, we are still working on the state. They have not approved our program yet, and have questions for us. We do have some time to work with them, and so that's where we are, and hopefully that stream buffer issue will be worked out in that discussion, or in those discussions. Okay, so while designing our alternative program, we simplified this by requiring one, regardless of whether they're intermittent or perennial. So with the new stream buffers, which possibly expand beyond the prescribed width due to other environmental features like steep slopes or wetlands associated with the stream, preservation and reforestation are now prioritized within the buffers, and a justification is actually required for not being able to do so. So examples of not being able to provide the preservation or a forestation or reforestation within the buffers might be in the case of utility easements, necessary road crossings, trails, master plan trails, that sort of things. So with the development applications.
Sorry,
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
There's a scenario.
From the chat.
The question, it says a scenario, transit center, perennial stream, wetland, still 76 feet?
It's what, 75 feet, perennial stream, transit center, wetland. Well, so 75 feet is the baseline, right? And there may be expansions based on other features. It's something, so when we, before we review a development application, the applicant submits what's called a natural resource inventory or an NRI, and that will determine all of those factors that determine exactly where that stream buffer will go, or how much the primary management area will be expanded to include the stream buffer and any other features. So it's a very site-specific question that possibly yes, but it could possibly be expanded beyond that. All right, so with development applications, we implemented a woodland replacement requirement of 1/4 to 1 within transit districts, designated transit centers, and 1 to 1 outside of these centers, which is consistent with the state mandate. What this means is that for every acre cleared within a transit center, 1/4 of an acre must be replaced. Then for properties outside of the transit centers, the replacement is 1 acre for every acre cleared. So the goal from the state is to develop and redevelop, is for development and redevelopment to be focused on transit centers and to discourage the sprawling development that continues to occur throughout the state. And with this, to increase tree canopy throughout the state and maintain and even more retain or restore critical habitat. So these goals, by the way, line up with our general county plan 2035 and our area sector plans and our green infrastructure plan.
Sir, are those all on site replacement plans?
They not necessarily. Yeah, so there are opportunities to plant to do. Yeah, and actually I'll get into that a little bit. Yes, thank you for that question. All right, but then the developers are still responsible for making the thresholds on site. So if I'm developing a 10-acre center in a transit center, LTO zone, so that's it's the 4th column or the 4th row on that first dark blue column is the LTO. I think yes. So if I'm developing in that zone, I need to provide at least 1.5 acres or 15% woodland conservation on site. So they have to meet that threshold on site, regardless of how much clearing they're doing or what they're proposing for development. Using that same site, if it is fully wooded with 8.5 acres of clearing, so then you're responsible for about 2 acres of replacement. So that's the 1/4 to 1 gets you to the 2 acres. And I know, and I apologize, this gets a little technical. It's kind of hard to follow verbally. But so if that same, but if that, I guess my point is their replacement requirement for the woodland clearing of 8.5 acres is just over 2. But if they're outside a transit center, then they're responsible for that full 8.5 acres of clearing to replace that the 8.5 acres. So you may, so as a developer, you may thank us for the relief inside the transit center, but if your project is fully wooded and outside of a transit center, your first question might be, well, how does that even work? If I'm developing a site, if it's a 10-acre site, I'm clearing 8.5 acres to develop, how can I possibly put 8.5 acres back on the property plus some? possibly. You can't. And a site like this is actually a split image of two time periods. A project like this just wouldn't work. So, oops, I'm having the worst time with this thing here. I got it. There we go. All set. Thank you. All right. So the answer to that is offsite banking, alternative credits, or worst case, a fee and lieu. So Prince George's County is unique to some other jurisdictions in that we have a pretty robust conservation banking program. This allows developers to meet requirements by having trees either preserved or planted at an offsite location. We have criteria as to where that should go, usually starting within the same watershed, but we're finding, particularly now with the demand, and there's very limited opportunities, particularly in the Potomac watershed, it's tough to find projects or conservation banks that are in the same watershed as the project itself. So we're typically pretty flexible on that point. It does need to be at a location within the county, though. It's actually a full process. So it's a pretty in-depth process. The process is pretty straightforward, but getting conservation banks is pretty in-depth. So property owners have established conservation banks throughout the county. So they have, let's just say, 100-acre bank. That's maybe 50 acres of woodland, 50 acres of maybe fallow farm field. So what they have is 50 acres of a planted banking, and then 50 acres of afforestation banking that they can use, that they then sell those credits off to developers.
Are we getting into that side at all today?
Not in depth.
No worries.
No, just that it exists, that it is a program that's available. So to date, there are approximately 650 acres of banking property available. Sounds like a lot, but when you're talking about having to replace 1 acre for every acre cleared, that 650 acres may go pretty quickly. So the best solution, which is part of the intent of the state bill, is to seek opportunities either to redevelop brownfields or other obsolete or antiquated but developed properties, or to remain in the centers where there's considerable relief to that. So with all this offsite banking, the new ordinance allowed for 60% of the afforestation reforestation requirement to be in retention for banking. So that was the 50 acres of retention, I said planted, but retention versus afforestation. An applicant can use up to 60% of their requirement in retention. And the state's position on that is retention banking doesn't give any more woodland into the county. It just saves some that's already there. So it doesn't, or to the state, I guess. So they're trying to encourage afforestation banking, which would be typically on fallow fields, farm fields, and then that interferes. There are competing interests there. You have not just agriculture, but now solar arrays are hugely popular to use on these, or to install on these fallow farm fields. So there are some challenges with that. Also, derelict or abandoned mining sites, surface mining sites. Now, the problem there is usually they've been stripped clean of any quality of soil. So there's got to be a lot of remediation work in order to get that soil back into a condition that can be planted on as a banking site. So the 60%. So then we're allowing 60% of the requirement to be in what's called retention, allowing the other 40% to be either afforestation or on-site, possibly a fee in lieu if it qualifies. So the other is the use of street trees in transit center. In our experience, stormwater management areas they're not very stable. They're often cleared or vegetation is removed, not always put back. And we just thought it's too dynamic of an area to be counting towards woodland conservation. So we did not include that in our legislation.
Hey, Tom.
Yes.
Before you leave the banking issue, you said there's about 658 acres of banking space available in county. Do you know what the current inventory of afforestation banks are?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Do
you want to repeat it?
Since I'm on microphone.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned there were about 658 acres of banking credits available in the county. And my question is, do you know what percentage of those are afforestation banking credits?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's a question. The answer. I did look that up when I came up with the 600. When I calculated out the 650. I don't remember what that is, but I think it's around 100. Something. Yeah. So we do on our website in the environmental page of the Park and Planning's website. We do publish the available banking, the list, and that does indicate on that list what is afforestation versus retention banking and the acreage. So it identifies all of the various banks that we have, how much acreage they have available, and whether or not it's afforestation or retention banking.
And it is in the environmental section of Maryland National Capital Park and Planning site?
It is, yeah. There's a drop down under the environmental drop down on countywide planning is woodland conservation. Think woodland conservation or woodland conservation ordinance, and within that there is available banking. I think it's at the very bottom. Or you can Google. Google's the best way to navigate any website, right? The tree canopy ordinance, like the stream buffers, is technically not part of the woodland conservation ordinance. But again, it's intrinsically entwined with the woodland ordinance. It's in the same subtitle. Subtitle 25 is both woodland conservation and tree canopy. This is Division 3 of the ordinance. The woodland conservation ordinance is Division 2. So that same University of Vermont study shows, unsurprisingly, that the majority of our tree canopy density is located outside of the urban areas and closer to the Patuxent on the eastern boundary of the county. And you can kind of see that with the darker shaded hexagons in this image here. So as many of us work to improve areas where heat island effect and vegetative disparity are issues, it's important for us to focus efforts in these areas that lack canopy. However, not all projects are subject to the tree canopy ordinance. Smaller projects in certain zones do not have requirements to provide additional canopy. So for those applicable zones where the ordinance does apply, they are increased across the board by 5%. So you see the RE jump from 20 to 25. The next row down, they jump from 15 to 20, and then 10 to 15% in the more urban zones. So the other change to that was now they apply only to the net tract area. Before it was the gross tract area, which included floodplains. So the net tract is the total area of the site minus the floodplain, and so now floodplains can no longer be used to meeting those tree canopy requirements. So grandfathering, as I stated earlier, we've been through a couple different ordinances, 1990 to 2010, and then 2010 to 2024. And along the way, there's several minor updates that you see on this list here. With the 2024 legislation, we were absolutely not interested in maintaining grandfathering of the older ordinances. So as working with multiple ordinances tends to be complicated, it makes an already complicated process somewhat convoluted and slows our efforts for good conservation. But we realize that with projects in the review stream and developers making earnest efforts for development, absolutely cutting them off on July 1 would have been unfair and very costly to development. So much to the dismay of us and the environmental groups, and to some degree the state, we set some conditions on grandfathering of our older ordinances. Plans that were approved prior to September 2010 that have not been implemented with a grading permit are now considered expired. So if it was a 2008 tree conservation plan, and here we are 16 years later, it still has not been implemented, then that plan is effectively expired, and any development applications for that site, they would have to come in under the new 2024 regulations. So yeah, we figured if the developer hasn't gotten started in 14 or more years, then it's just time to start over. Plans accepted for review after September 2010 and up to June 30th, 2024 were grandfathered until 2029 based on recent legislation that was just in the council a few weeks ago. So we had originally set it at 2028 in working with the council and the development community. We came up with what we considered a compromise and bumped that date to 2029. So there are, however, conditions to those approvals to qualify as a grandfathered application. If the site was accepted for review or approval prior to July 1, but now is coming in with what we consider by codified criteria shown here, a major revision, then it will be subject to the 2024 ordinance. So if it's under review and it's coming in with minor changes, again, if it doesn't qualify as a major change shown here, then it's subject, it can still go in under the 2010 ordinance. Otherwise, it's subject to 2024. So, oh, I'm already there. Okay. So we've been running this new ordinance for almost 6 months now. It was July 1 when it was implemented. When we've had several cases in for review, which I could probably give an entire presentation on just the lessons learned from pushing through this very complicated piece of legislation in a very short period of time. For one thing, we didn't have much opportunity to beta test all the scenarios on this and have found some errors and inconsistencies and some unintended consequences. Some of those we've already brought back before council. But we've been working with the development community as well as conservation groups, other county agencies to fix some of these errors. And added to that, DNR is expected to update their technical manual by the end of this month. We haven't heard anything from them on that, so we're not sure what the status of that is. So we expect after they update their technical manual, that will give us some ideas of some changes that we may need to make legislatively. And there may be an omnibus or a follow-up bill to make some of those changes as needed by the state. The state also, like I said earlier, has not fully approved our program. So they may have comments or changes that they will require us to make to continue with this alternative program. Yeah, so with this ordinance alongside our general plan 2035 and our green infrastructure plan, which all emphasize development within centers and more meaningful preservation areas, we do expect a much better result from tree canopy studies in the future. Hopefully we won't see that line going so far to the left. And with that, hopefully a greener Prince George's County. So that's all for me. If you have questions, yes. Oh, then we have the mic that'll get passed around, right? Is that how we want to do it? Thanks.
My question is silly.
No such thing as a silly question.
Thanks. And my question is there a tree bank map that allows developers to see what parcels are already in the tree bank?
There's not a map per se. It's you can look up based on the tree conservation plan. So when you go to that list on our website, it does tell you, and I think it tells you, I have to double check on this. I don't remember if it tells the watershed that it's in. So yeah, so it does identify which watershed it's in, I believe, how much acreage is available, and it gives you a TCP.
But opposite, like what's already used.
Yeah, not specifically, or
It tells you what the availability is, not what the
Yeah.
how many credits.
I guess my question is to determine how, does a property already have a tree bank on it or not?
yeah, okay. Yeah, it's not specifically mapped. What you'd have to do is go to that website list and find, you know, if you're looking for a development that's requiring 15 acres of mitigation that you're not able to do on site, then you would look and see what opportunities you have on that, starting with your watershed and working your way out from there. So we have been pretty flexible about what the watershed issue. I think when I started here, we were very strict on it, and then, you know, available, particularly in the Potomac River, you think about our Potomac water basin is all the more urbanized areas of the county. There just aren't going to be, the land is just too valuable to be holding in a tree bank there. So our tree banks are primarily in the southern eastern parts of the county. So, yes.
Good afternoon. Is there any appetite to making that a layer maybe on GIS so that the mapping is not a new effort, but maybe just added something to an existing resource?
So you're thinking for the tree banking again?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually not a bad idea to have, you know, available tree banks or tree banks in the county, I guess. Yeah, that's not a bad. We do have a layer that's for woodland conservation, and for tree conservation plans, of which tree banks are part of. There is a tree conservation plan for tree banks. So that's actually a very good idea, to provide something like that. I'll see if that's a possibility for us. I'll just write that down so I don't forget. Hang on one second. Yes, Ms.
We
Kelly.
have some online questions. How does the new stream buffer work with NRI grandfathering? And do previously approved NRIs need to be revised for ongoing projects?
Yeah, that's kind of a case-by-case scenario. If we can identify that there wouldn't be any expansions to the PMA beyond the stream buffer, then we will usually allow them to use the old natural resource inventory and then provide the updated information on the tree conservation plan. But there are circumstances that, you know, if we start to see, okay, we are expanding the stream buffer by the additional 25 feet, and oops, there's steep slopes or wetlands associated with that, and that primary management area will expand beyond the regular stream buffer, then that could be then we may require a revision to the NRI for that. We're trying not to require those for ones that have already been approved, but there are circumstances where we just need that additional information to do a full evaluation of the site.
How does this relate to existing residences as opposed to new developments in Chesapeake Bay critical areas?
This does not relate to Chesapeake Bay critical areas at all. So the Woodland Conservation Ordinance, the Chesapeake Bay critical area, which is defined as 1,000 feet landward of any tidal shoreline. So you think of all the tidal waters along the Patuxent and the Potomac rivers in this county, and then 1,000 feet in from those shorelines is the Chesapeake Bay critical area, and those are exempt from the Woodland Conservation Ordinance. So they don't apply at all to that. When you're talking about existing residential communities, there are no impacts unless you're coming in to do development on the site. And then you might be required to provide additional information, or there may be variances or exceptions, variances or variations needed.
Okay, we have one more. Is there an ETA of when Division 2, Section 25, the Woodland Conservation Ordinance, will be updated online?
I would love to give a good answer on that. I can tell you we have been waiting, and we've been told that it does take some time, but we do not have any idea when it's out of our hands entirely. It's a county council bill, and it's in the entirely in the jurisdiction of the county to update the website. Hopefully soon. In the meantime, we have to refer people, unfortunately, to the actual bill. So we refer to the actual county council website where the bill, as it was approved and signed, is published. Question in the front.
Question here. I have several questions. Some are not exactly related to the legislation, but related to tree canopy. I know there's some organizations like Casey Trees, which they absolutely will not plant certain trees that are considered native in this area simply because of the effects of climate change. So I'm wondering if the commission has either lobbied or thought about lobbying DNR, Department of Natural Resources, regarding what trees can and should be planted with the new tree canopy. And just as an example, I think Casey's will not plant northern red oaks anymore. They're more based on southern red oaks because of increased temperature and lack of water that's been going on during the summers.
Yeah, so that's hopefully something that maybe DNR with their revised Forest Conservation Act technical manual, that they will be looking at the effects of climate change and what, not trees of the present necessarily, but of the future, and what the survivability or probability of survival for trees are when determining which ones to include. We aren't specifically lobbying DNR, but we do have an open dialogue with them, and it does come up as a recommendation to provide, to be kind of forward thinking about what species to allow, or to be part of the allowable tree list. Now, of course, when it is a list of trees, developers and landscape architects do have that opportunity to pick and choose what trees they wish to put on a property, provided it is within that list. But yeah, we certainly don't want trees that are going to have difficulty surviving here, even if they are considered what's traditionally considered native.
Second question is the problematic process of oftentimes redevelopment. Very difficult oftentimes, especially urban areas. College Park is one example. Redeveloping properties and getting the tree canopy to a level that the new ordinance requires. To what level has the commission looked at green roofs? I know that green roofs specifically do not qualify for canopy, but again, lobbying the state, because we're losing a lot of opportunities on having green roofs where it can lower the temperature of some of these urban heat islands. Have smaller trees like maybe dogwoods or even shrubs. And again, the possibility of retaining more stormwater management within a property, which oftentimes is very difficult in an urban area. So I know they're expensive. I know it's a long process, but I see an opportunity that I don't see a lot of organizations exploiting, or at least, ramping up the dialogue for such things.
Yeah, so the green roofs, as you indicated, they do qualify for stormwater management. We currently don't count them towards tree canopy, but it is again, that is something we have had discussions with. I know I don't think the state's interested in doing that. I can't say for sure, but it's something we need to start looking at some alternatives, particularly in these urban areas. Because again, there's these competing interests that we want these sites to be fully, or to develop fully. However, there are these tree canopy requirements that are lowering the potential density of the site. So,
hi, and this is Katina Shoulders. Also want to mention that I believe that green buildings are one of the standards in the green building standards that's in subtitle 27. So it does exist, just not in the tree conservation, the Woodland Conservation Ordinance, because the Woodland Conservation Ordinance is to conform to the state code. And we could add more, but it's really about what, conforming with the state requirements. We can do more, but can't do less. But we do have it in the subtitle 27. I can try to send you that, Alex. Okay.
Final, it's more of a comment than a question. We all know the development process is extraordinarily convoluted and oftentimes, again, not linear. Just want to put a plug in for, it'd be wonderful if the commission could draw out like a visual of, from start to, sometimes it's never finished, but
yeah,
continuing process of land being purchased, subdivided, developers coming in. Because I know that there was, especially with CB 77, there was some concerns with, what actually was considered a major and minor revisions.
Yeah.
What were those percentages within a piece of property that was being subdivided or being had a permit, but not the entire parcel was permitted.
right.
So, especially for the public, and again, the process is so complex that if somebody can't read something or look at a manual or something, how that process is done, it's difficult for them, for example, to come up and testify in a public hearing what they would like to see or change. So I know you have all your workload and everything. You guys work extremely hard at what you do. Maybe even if a consultant could come in and assist you with that, and have a timeline when that would be finished, that would really be nice, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I personally work off of benchmarks and timelines along the way, right? From this is the inception of a project to completion, to to the family rolling in with the opening the garage doors and they're moved in. So that is important, and that's something maybe as a department we can consider looking into. It goes way beyond woodland conservation on that, but yeah.
So that is an excellent point and a great idea. I'm James Hunt, by the way, Deputy Director with the Planning Department. I did want to make a quick point here. Can they see me? You all right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let me do this real quick. So that's an excellent point, like I was saying. The county, along with us and other agencies, have been talking about process improvements, and that is one of the ideas that came up. And so what we're looking at doing right now is, just like you said, placing that information on our website, the start to finish of the development review process. So we're going to probably, of course, start with the NRI and then go all the way through the process. Now, understanding that there are some aspects of that particular development that may not be associated with that project. So, for example, some projects don't necessarily need a preliminary plan of subdivision. They just need to get a detailed site plan. So understanding that someone can just jump into the process, that's where they go, and then they go to permit or go to final plat and then permit all that afterwards. But just understanding from start to finish, I think that's really important for not only for the citizens of Prince George's County, but also just in general, the development community period, on what that process looks like for everyone. Also talking about the timelines, right? Because some of the things that people are unclear of are the timelines behind it. Even when we're talking about within the detailed site plan process, like the 70 days time period. So backing that out, what does that mean for staff? You're talking about SDRC that's going on, right? You're also talking about, let's say, any other meetings that are going to pre-application, neighborhood meetings, all that stuff, fitting that in to the process at that point in time. What does that look like for everyone? Because when you go back to your clients, time is money. So we need to tell them what that timeline looks like, and so they know what they're going to be looking at throughout the entire process.
Thanks, James. Okay, any other questions online, Lisa?
I do have one last one.
Okay.
Have there been any modifications to exemptions?
There have been, so as part of the legislation, there were modifications to the exemptions. It used to be that if you were over an acre but had less than 10,000 square feet of woodland, then you were exempt. We took out that less than 10,000 square feet of woodland and made anything that's over an acre subject to the ordinance. There are some exceptions to that, government projects, and a few other exceptions. But it is something that we're continuing to look at as well. That was one that there were some unintended consequences to, that we were working on.
Awesome. So on that note, let's give Mr. Tom Burke a round of applause. And Tom is our subject matter expert on this topic for us tree huggers. So with that being said, we're about to wrap up this session. So what we want to make sure is if there's any feedback that you guys have today, if there's any input you want to have on any of our process improvements, these sessions allow for that to happen. If there's any update to our ordinances or manuals, we're going to use this also as a platform. So we want to make sure you guys are part of our processes as we're making changes. So when we do go to council, we've been able to vet it and get input as needed on a lot of our great processes here. So we're really, really busy. We're rolling up our sleeves and we're doing a lot already, and we're going to roll it into 2025. So Natalia, what's the next Brown Bag session? Because we're going to open up the registration. So if Natalia can come up to share that. Thanks to folks online for also joining. We had a lot of people join, and so we like it when you guys come in public, in person here at Largo headquarters. We have space, but we also appreciate, and I do want to acknowledge if there's any elected officials or any other special guests online. Thank you so much for showing up today, and everyone here in person is also one of our special guests. So Natalia.
Yes, the next session will be on January 14th. It will be on transportation procedures, and we will also touch a little on bicycle and pedestrian impact statement. We will be sending, as I said, the registration link and a flyer with the topics that are lined up for 2025. Thank you, everyone.